Okay. Hi. So my name is Nikki Dong, and today I'm going to be telling you about the ancient technology that was founded and originated in China. Okay. So more specifically, today I'm going to be talking about gunpowder, paper, silk, and I'm going to be ending today with the compass. So, firstly, like I just said, starting off with gunpowder. So, gunpowder is a mixture of salt, pepper, which is basically just potassium, nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal mixed all together. And then when they're combined, this mixture will burn very quickly and it explode as a result. So, with the discovery of gunpowder, gunpowder was first discovered by Chinese monks in the 9th century CE, and they were trying to find a life extending elixir, potion, whatever you want to call it. I would argue that they found the exact opposite of that. And so, with this new discovery, these monks became very violent to society as they began invading and overthrowing other civilizations. With the finding of gunpowder, led to the development of weapons, cannons, and bombs, probably making them even more violent. So, there were some repercussions of the finding of gunpowder. The release of the collection of the most important military techniques was invented and written is basically a military guidebook from the 10th century that holds a recording of the original gunpowder formula. The most common groups that used gunpowder were the Chinese and Mongol military in the 13th century, and by the 13th century CE, gunpowder was discovered in Middle Eastern civilizations due to trade. However, with this, it wasn't it wasn't really well known that gunpowder was a tricky tool that needed precise measurement in order to get the exploding agent to occur. So with that, no one really knew the gunpowder formula. And then we some may argue that once it was perfected, we got a long-lasting leading weapon that has already made its time right now in current times, as we see in war. And then soon after the 15th century, other cultures started making their own spins on gunpowder, such as European and Indian powers. Okay, so next up, I have paper. So, with the invention of paper, it was invented in the second century, and I put a question mark because there's a lot of debate on when it really was invented, but I'm just putting second century. And I also wrote that it was made on accident because it kind of was made by accident. Because paper was invented to be a cheaper alternative compared to bamboo, wood, and silk papers. And so it was believed that in the second century, Chinese paper included hemp. And so I guess one day someone left the hemp sitting out too long. And when it was sitting out too long in the paper, or I'm sorry, when it was sitting too long in the water, a residue type material formed, making a brand new material. And so, Kylon, which I have right here, I have a picture of her. She was the director of the Imperial Workshops and was given credit for the creation of paper by pressing wet plant fibers into sheets, wooden frames, or screens. And so, all of this um, gave a lighter and cheaper paper alternative that replaced the expensive bamboo, silk, wooden papers. So we have different dynasties and their different influences on paper. So starting off at the end of the Tang Dynasty, hemp paper was long outdated and was replaced with bamboo fibers. And this is because hemp a hemp plant takes so long to grow, and so within this time, literally hemp was wiped out completely. So there was literally certain Chinese regions that didn't have hemp. And so bamboo grows faster and was deemed as a cheaper material. And so because of all of this, paper was so highly valued in China that there was an imposed tax during the Tang Dynasty. And also, I think this is kind of cool. Maybe it's just because I love organization, but the Tang Dynasty had a color coding system with their paper. So white papers were legal documents, yellow papers were like government proposals and like government purposed information, and then blue was communication with the temples. So that was the Tang Dynasty. So with the Song Dynasty, paper production became better and more efficient because there was a new main raw paper material that was founded, which was boiled mulberry tree bark. And you'll also hear about mulberry when I talk about silk. But anyways, okay, sorry. So they used paper money, and I'll talk about this also in the next couple slides. But paper money started within this dynasty. Yeah, so that's the Song Dynasty. That's all I have. And then for the Han Dynasty, the Han Dynasty used paper to produce maps. So they also found other purposes for paper other than paper. I'm sorry if that makes any sense. So paper was used for maps. It was made for packaging items like wrapping paper, like for gifts. Paper was used for hats, to coat armor, and in some cases to make windows and be a window. And by the end of the Han Dynasty, different materials of paper were being experimented with, which also increased the quality of paper. So those different materials included plant fibers, grass stems, vegetables, and tree bark. And then sometimes those were blended together to make a cheap mix of materials, and this resulted in high quality paper. Okay. So, paper trade and capture. So, obviously, the Silk Road was great for helping any type of trade, but it also helped with paper trade. And with this, paper was considered very valuable. It was a very valuable resource because no one knew how to make it. And China knew that no one knew how to make it. So they were like, we're going to be secretive about the recipe of paper. So no one else can have it. However, that kind of backfired because some paper makers were captured. They were kidnapped in battle. So eventually, other Middle Eastern and European countries made their own paper. So that did not happen. But anyways, um, yeah. Okay. So paper had different functions, it had different uses. So if the paper had an appealing texture, if it had an appealing pattern or color, it was reserved to be paper for calligraphy and art. So these papers were made specifically from rice, wheat straw, sandalwood, bark, hibiscus, and sometimes seaweed, which I think that's kind of cool. Um, Paper also helped accelerated Chinese literature and literacy because schools used paper and books. Paper also made its way into being a currency form in the 12th century in Asia. And as specifically you talked about in one of our lectures, ancient China used cowrie shells as a form of currency, and then they had to produce their own shells because they ran out of materials. But anyways, as trade continued, paper payment sort of worked its way in and was invented in the Tang Dynasty. So that's kind of cool. Relating it back to class. Anyways, and then brushwork, inkwork, and calligraphy also began making its way into Chinese culture. It still is a big prominent component of Chinese culture. So yeah. Okay. Next about silk, I'm going to get into more detail, but just a little introduction. Silk was first produced in Neolithic China before paper and became a major source of income for workers in the country of China, and it gained a lot of popularity throughout the globe. And so, silk obviously comes from silkworms. One worm can produce 3,000 feet of thread to become material. And then obviously the material can be dyed and painted and, designed to look whatever. So here I have the making. I'm sorry, I wish I could. Can I move my camera? Okay, I can't move my camera. I'm so sorry. I did not think that through. But silk was first made in the 36th century BC. And we see records of the first weaved silk of mulberry leaves and threads from silkworm cocoons. And it was really with the Han Dynasty that silk quality improved by becoming finer, stronger, and even multicolored with embroidered patterns and designs. And these designs range from human and like people depictions and like patterns along with like Chinese characters. And so, okay, so silk production was usually just a women dominated field. And so their job was to ensure that the silk worms were regularly fed on mulberry leaves. It was also vital that the women made sure that the worms were warm enough to spin the worms' cocoons. I'll get into that. So the women would wash the silkworm eggs with water and set them into a warm little house, if you will. The house was for the worms. And to get a faster birth from the eggs, they were watered with an herbal water. And so basically, these houses for the silkworms had to be clean, quiet, warm, and have very little air movement, like not a lot of ventilation. And then I think I'm covering it, the text. I'm covering the text. And then in about 3 weeks' times, the worms would hatch, and then they were covered with boiling water to make their threads unravel. And then a spinning wheel was used to spin the thread. And then eventually, as the demand increased for silk, men entered this field. So both men and women started making silk. So, like I just said, as silk production rose, the demand kept was rising. So China couldn't maintain the secret behind creating silk. So eventually production spread to Korea and Japan. So they were also part of it. And there are also Zhejiang excavations that have shown proof of Neolithic tools for making silk. So there are areas in the Indus Valley that also suggest that silk was produced there. So silk was used for clothing, fans, wall hangings, banners, and books and papers and stuff like that. So eventually silk was used also as clothing. So robes, gowns, and jackets are made out of silk. And all this clothing specifically represents wealth because only the lower class wore cotton, because only the elite can afford silk. And then specifically in Korea, there were specific laws that only people of high social rank could wear silk. So silk was used as a form of payment as well because it was a very wealthy symbol, very rich. And this is kind of fun because it was said that there was silk found in an Egyptian tomb. So that is suggestion that there was early international trade that was occurring. All right, so lastly, we have the compass. So the ancient Chinese used the compass firstly for worship, fortune telling, and aligning buildings, like the art of aligning buildings. But between the 11th and 12th centuries, Chinese sailors then took on compasses to help with navigation. So I put a picture of the compass here because I tried explaining it with text and I was like, you know what? No, I'm just going to explain it with a pic. I'm going to try my best, but I'm going to try my best to explain how the compass works because I tried typing it out, couldn't do it. Oh, God. Okay, so the Huan dynasty had the earliest evidence of compass, which was made out of magnetite, magnetite, which was had the name of the original had the original name of a South Pointer, and so it had a little pool of water. However, some compasses had a magnetic needle, but in this picture specifically, this mineral is a natural magnet that aligns with Earth's magnetic field, which defines north and south polarity. And so in the center here, I'm going to use my mouse. Hopefully, you can see my mouse in the recording. But the ladle shaped spoon was the compass and was placed on a bronze plate. And this bronze plate represents the earth and was used with the constellation in the stars, stuff like that. And so this spoon is surrounded by a bigger circle, and this bigger circle represents heaven. And then surrounded by heaven is the direction. So we have the 8 directions. We have north, east, southwest, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. All the directions are here. And the spoon also represents the Great Bear constellation, and the spoon handle always points towards the sun. Ancient Chinese alchemists discovered that the magnetite element would aim towards a magnetic north and represent to being central in the earth despite its direction. So if it's pointed in a specific direction, the user will correlate it to a specific constellation. Okay. Um, Tang Dynasty influenced the compass. So they made another way of the compass by using iron needles by rubbing them with magnetite and putting them in water. So this, and then they also made the compass more compact, as you can see here. It's a little bit more portable than the plate, if you ask me. Um, so future dynasties, would carry them on excursions, on boats. It was just easier to carry. So along with the creation of the compass, we see concepts of direction, human science, and technology emerging, and it's still present with us today. So that's kind of cool if you ask me. So I think it's really cool that we have 4 inventions literally from ancient China that we literally all still have in current times. We still use it. We still use gunpowder, unfortunately. We still use paper. We have silk and like compasses, like directions and stuff like that. And like there's like a compass on my phone. Like it's crazy that this ancient compass is now in my phone. Well, that's a little different with technology, but yeah, anyways, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time. I have my resources here and I have my images here, but I'm going to include when I submit I'm going to submit the slides and I'm going to somehow submit this recording if I can figure it out. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your time with your lectures and the readings this semester. I really enjoyed this class. But thank you. That's all I have for today.